Good morning and welcome to the April 16, 2019 Calaveras County Board of Supervisors meeting. If you can, would you please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll begin with announcements, but we'll start with CAO Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Before the board begins this morning, I need to inform you that we have received new information after the agenda was posted last Friday, which is urgent for the board to review in closed session prior to making its personnel decision in item number 2 of today's agenda. Government Code Section 54954.2b allows the board to act immediately on items not included in the agenda if it makes 2 findings by a 4/5 vote. Finding number 1 is that there is an immediate need to take action, and finding number 2 is the need arose after the posting of the agenda. This information involves a personnel matter which can only be discussed in closed session, and I can assure the board that the information came to staff's attention after today's agenda was published and posted, and that the timing is such that the discussion cannot be delayed. I am therefore recommending that the board find that, as required by Government Code Section 54954.2b, there is an immediate need to receive new information in closed session, that the information and need for review came to light after the posting of today's agenda, and that the board should therefore immediately go into closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 54957B1, Public Employee Appointment, County Administrative Officer.
Thank you very much. Is there a motion to go into closed session?
Chair,
Supervisor Stopper.
I move that the board find that, as required by Government Code 54954.2b, there is an immediate need to receive new information in closed session, that the information and need for review came to light after posting of today's agenda, and that the board should therefore immediately move into closed session pursuant to Government Code 54957B1, Public Employee Appointment, Title, County Administrative Officer.
Thank you. We have a motion on the floor. Is there a second or a discussion around this? Or second?
Second.
Second by Supervisor Callaway. All in favor? Then we'll go, once it's posted, we'll do public comment.
Public comment.
Sorry, if 4/5 vote is obtained, the item would be added to the agenda, at which point there would be public comment on this item before we recess into a closed session.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Call the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries 5-0. I therefore put this item on the agenda for today, and therefore I invite public comment. Is there any public comment at this time before we go into closed session? Seeing none, we stand recessed to closed session. I apologize to everybody. We will return at 10 o'clock.
Don't be.
Welcome back to the Calaveras County April 16, 2019 Board of Supervisors meeting. I want to thank the audience for your patience while we took care of some county business before we get on to the main show today. I apologize for the hour and a half delay. We will report out.
Report of closed session. Pursuant to Government Code Section 54957B1, Public Employee Appointment, Title, County Administrative Officer, the board received the new information and will take final action in item 2 on the regular agenda.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to announcements. Are there any announcements from board members? Supervisor Mills.
Thank you, Chair. Just a reminder, Deputy Sheriff's Association dinner this Saturday here in San Andreas, if anyone's interested in attending.
Thank you very much. Any announcements from staff?
Yes.
I am very
Director Maurer.
happy to announce that the final EIR is now released for public review. We will be scheduling the beginning of the general plan adoption hearings in May. I don't have a date yet. I need to meet with the chair to talk about that. But the document is posted on our website. We'll be getting printed copies available sometime this week, hopefully today or tomorrow, and they'll be available for public purchase as well as CDs. So I'll make sure that you will all get a copy when I get them. So
Thank you very much. I'm sure that'll rocket to the top of the Calaveras County Best Read list, like the New York Times. Thank you. Is there other staff announcements? Very well. Seeing none, we will move on to general public comment, which we will do for 30 minutes. If you want to talk about cannabis, do not do it at this time. I will ask everybody to always remain polite and courteous to one another, and we'll have a productive and good day. Madam Clerk.
General public comment. Any item of interest to the public that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board and is not posted on the consent or regular agendas may be addressed during the public comment period. California law prohibits the board from taking action on any matter which is not posted on the agenda unless it is determined to be an emergency by the Board of Supervisors. If public comment is completed before the 30-minute allotted time period, the board may immediately move to the next order of business. If public comment is not completed during the allotted time period, it will be continued as the last item of business in order to provide an opportunity for the remainder of comments to be heard.
Thank you. I want to let everybody know also that there is overflow seating next door, and it's television piped in there. Again, if you want to talk about Public Works, Human Resources in the CAO, or cannabis, do not do it at this time. So excluding those subjects. Is there any public comment? Mr. Wilson.
Yes, sir. I have a quick question. I've been coming here now for the last 4 to 5 months. Men's bathroom right over here has one of the urinals that doesn't have any way to flush it. I'm not much of a plumber, but I can do plumbing. If you need a volunteer, I will put something in there, because when there are more than 2 people
Happy hands.
that need to use that facility, it means there starts to be a line out here. Now, I'm a person who has a heart problem, okay? I could fall over tomorrow if my pacemaker doesn't, or today, or now. But I'm on a drug called LASIK, and I don't know if anybody knows what that is. A lot of us older people do, because our doctors are giving it to us. It makes you remove the fluid in your body at any point in time that it decides you need to do that. And having no place to do that means I got to find a bush or something else. Is there any way to get the urinal fixed in that bathroom in some kind of, I know government moves slow, and it is excruciatingly moving slowly, fixing that urinal. Can we do something about that? Is it possible? I don't know. Thank you.
TMI. Thank you. Next public speaker. Jason? How many other public speakers do we have that don't want to talk about cannabis or other issues on the agenda? Patricia, are you getting up to talk? All right, 1, 2, and 3. Beth, you'll be the last. Jason, please.
Good morning, Jason Campbell, District 5. I'm wondering what's going on in Valley Springs right at the moment. More specifically, I'm wondering why I'm seeing political signs popping up in District 1 concerning what's going on in District 5. I'm wondering why I'm seeing a fresh Clyde Clapp for Supervisor District 5 sign posted directly across from Zippy Mart. I'm also wondering why I'm seeing recall stopper signs popping up in District 1. While I respect the opinions and rights to vote any way anyone so chooses, I think that these signs should be posted in District 5. I also would like to formally and on the record wish the proponents and former District 5 Supervisor Clyde Clapp good luck on that recall. I'd like to state on the record that it is my personal opinion that the boardroom, District 5, and the county as a whole is better off with Mr. Stopper as our supervisor. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. Patricia? Sure, then.
For months, they had recall PLAP out in front of the government center every time we had a supervisors meeting. And so I personally feel that what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Governor Newsom has decided that people shouldn't live out like we do. We should all move and live like rats in a tenement. And I personally take offense to that. I think it's better to have people out in the forest. That's how children learn to love nature and value it by experiencing it. And I think that having people in the forest is important because they can work their own land and try to manage nature, which the government does not do. And you can see the forest, the Ponderosa Forest, clear across the Sierra Nevada is at least a third dead, which is kindling for the ones that are alive and growing bugs that will kill the rest of them. And so if the government doesn't want people living in the forest, they should do a better job of taking care of the government land, the people's land. And so anyway, thank you.
Thank you. I do not see Beth here, so Bill, you get the spot.
Thank you and good morning. I just want to make a request regarding item 2. This is not about the content of item 2, but the process of item 2. Having been to more than a few of these meetings,
Bill, is this about item 2? Even the process related to item 2?
it's the process, not anything to do with item 2. It's the way it's going to be handled. I have a request to make.
You want to do it at item 2?
That's better.
No, I want to do it now. I'm just saying, let me go through it, and if it's improper, you stop me, okay?
Fair enough.
Okay. Having been to so many of these, I can see the way this is going to go, where we have all the questions, and then there will be possibly polling among the board. Now, the microphones you have now that you've had for the last year or so are a huge improvement over what used to be here. However, when you're talking to each other and taking polls and asking each other what they're going to do, you don't speak into your microphone. And so we hear all this crosstalk among the supervisors, and we like to record who is doing what on each question. How did you vote on this question? How did you vote on this question? Some of us pay attention, some of us keep score. And all I'm asking is that if you can't use the new microphones, that you ask the board clerk, yeah, you just moved it away, there you go. That's exactly what I'm saying. Maybe you could ask the board clerk to report right then who voted what on each item, if you're taking a poll on each item of the questionnaire today. That's all I'm asking, because we can't hear it otherwise. So, thank you.
Fair enough.
Excuse me.
Seeing no other public comment, I will close public comment. Thank you. I want to thank everybody for being respectful. Let's keep it going throughout the day. I'm going to have to be very firm on people sniping from the crowd on any side of the issue. So I won't apologize. We're going to have to do that because we've all done this dance before and we know it works better when everybody stays disciplined throughout the process. Thank you. Madam Clerk?
Consent agenda. The consent agenda items are expected to be routine and non-controversial. They will be acted upon by the board at one time without discussion. Any board member, staff member, or interested party may request removal of an item from the consent agenda for later discussion.
Are there any board members who wish to remove an item from the consent agenda? Staff members, members of the public? Seeing none, is there discussion or motion?
I'll move the consent agenda.
Is there a second? Moved by Supervisor Stopper. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Supervisor Callaway. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 5-0.
Item 2 on the agenda is from Human Resources to adopt a resolution appointing the county administrative officer and approve and authorize the board chair to sign the employment agreement.
Ms. Hawkins?
Good morning, Chair, members of the board. Judy Hawkins, Human Resources and Risk Director. I am happy to be before you today to bring to you a resolution and employment agreement appointing Dr. Albert Alt to the position of County Administrative Officer. We have Human Resources, under the direction of the board, did an extensive search for a new CAO, and I think that after doing a strong reference check, which his references gave him very strong accolades for being transparent, a strong financial officer, and a good leader. So I am very happy to have a new leader to the county. So Dr. Alt brings to Calaveras County, of course, besides his strong fiscal responsibilities that he's held, he's also has strong negotiation and human resources experience, which I'm very happy to have somebody to help back me up when I'm telling departments that they have to do things that they don't like to do. So there is, at this point, no significant changes or any changes to our fiscal budget since the CAO is budgeted, and that's all I have for you.
Thank you very much. Board discussion on this item. Supervisor Mills, your light's on?
Yes, in light of the information that was received on Saturday and the fact that Sunday was Palm Sunday and all of the phone calls, et cetera, that I've received, I would like to have time to put some additional thought and review into this decision before it's made, so I'm not prepared to support today. I would prefer that it be put off to the meeting of next week so that I have time to review the information that's been put in front of me, and from that can make a decision.
Thank you. There are the further board comments. Seeing none, I'll open up to public comment. Oh, excuse me.
Just a quick note. There is an error a Scrivener's error in the contract. Section 12 does reference the term starting on April 9th. That is supposed to be April 27th. There was a conflict between one section and the general provisions, and I just wanted to clarify that was, the commencement date is April 27th.
Should there be a motion, we will include that in the motion. Public comment? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board. Is there further discussion or a motion? And if there's a motion, please include the 4/29 start date.
Okay, before I do,
27.
I understand there's been a lot of drama over the last 4 or 5 days regarding this appointment. I can't speak on behalf of my colleagues, but on behalf of myself, I feel like due diligence was done on behalf of our CAO interim and our HR manager, and probably the rest of us who were Googling, tweeting, texting, emailing, calling, et cetera, and a conversation with Dr. Alt. I am comfortable in this appointment. I think it will do well for the County of Calaveras, which is my highest priority. So I will move the resolution as amended, appointing and establishing Dr. Alt as our county administrative officer.
Is there a second?
I agree that our staff has done a good job when it comes to vetting and moving through this process. And with that, I will second Marita's motion.
A motion by Supervisor Callaway, a second by Supervisor Stopper. I'll call the vote. We did public comment before. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed?
No.
4 aye, 1 opposed. Supervisor Mills opposing. It passes 4-1. Congratulations and welcome aboard, Mr. Alt.
Well, thank you very much for giving me a moment. I know you have a busy schedule today, so I won't take long. I first have to say I'm honored and proud to take this position. I appreciate the effort that's been put into it. I will say that it'll be difficult to leave Modesto Junior College. I have fantastic colleagues there. I have wonderful support. The faculty, classified professionals, and admin there, they really put students first, and they have an amazing institution. I'm lucky to have been there. That said, I'm a county resident. I've served on several commissions here, and I'm really looking forward to serving the county that my wife and I choose to raise our children in. And this work, I know it'll be tough work, but it's important work, and I'm looking forward to getting started, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. I don't think anybody will be more grateful than Mr. Lopez. Thank you so much. Thank you
Mr.
very
Chairman,
much.
I know it's not public comment time, but I certainly welcome Mr. Alt, and I know he'll do a wonderful job for this county, and I look forward to working with you over the next several days to help transition. Thank you.
And I do apologize, but I have an actual job to get back to you, so if you don't mind, I'll step out.
You have plenty of time to watch how these things go in the future. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for coming in.
Item 3 is from the Planning Department to receive a presentation and provide direction to staff regarding the content of a cannabis cultivation regulatory ordinance.
Thank you very much. Mr. Maurer, do you want to kick it off?
Certainly. Good morning. I'm Peter Maurer, the Planning Director. With me is Julie Moss-Lewis and Ethan Turner from the County Counsel's Office. To start off, I'd like to say that while my department, I'm taking the lead on this, this has been a team effort from the department heads of almost every department affected by the potential for cannabis regulation in the county. So it includes working with the sheriff, the DA, environmental management, building, public works, and other departments. So these recommendations are not just mine. These are a team effort that have been put together over several weeks of work. So back in February, we had a study session. At that time, some decisions were made by the board to move forward with a cultivation ordinance. I presented you with what we took down as our understanding of the direction that had been given. There were a number of questions that we did not get to on that day, and so I've tried to reorganize those, and at your direction have provided some options with our recommendation. I'm sure there are other options. You will probably hear from the public on some of these issues as well. What I'd like to do first is just go through the first few points of things that we discussed previously to make sure that we're all on the same page. There were a couple of items that I raised as far as discussion points in my memo to you, and just want to confirm that the direction that we're going. So if you'd indulge me, we just sort of quickly go through the first few points.
So as we get to these first points, Mr. Maurer, and we find they're not exactly the way they thought, would this be the time to change them?
Yeah, I think what would be best would be to get sort of a poll from the board of the direction you would like to go. We'll be making notes. This is we'll be writing things down as we go along, and to make sure that we capture things accurately. If there are changes that you'd like to see, or just a confirmation, that would be good. After we've gone through the list of questions that we have, I'm sure there may be other department heads who would like to weigh in, or maybe during some of those questions, other department heads would like to weigh in on some of those issues as you're discussing them. The public will then have an opportunity to bring up issues that maybe weren't addressed, or certainly concerns over the direction that we recommended or that you might have indicated you would be taking. When the public comment period is over, if there are any changes or any further discussion you would like to have on any of these issues, or any other issues that we didn't raise in my memo to you, that would be the time to sort of finalize the direction that you're giving to us
to prepare the ordinance. So with that, I think I don't know if you want me to go through each one of these, or if there's any of those first, 13 points that you don't think we captured properly or you'd like to revisit. I did raise some issues in my memo on the zoning and parcel size limitations, as well as the setback issue that was sort of left unanswered on personal cultivation. So unless there's anything dealing with...
I think we ought to go through each one. Just
That's
to
probably a
confirm.
cleaner way to do it,
Yeah,
just to...
otherwise we're going to be jumping all over the place.
Yeah, yeah. So the first one is, yes, we're going to move forward with regulatory ordinance. And last time there was a 3-to-1 vote, I recall, to move forward with that. Are there any changes and thoughts on that?
Let's do this. If somebody has a change in thoughts or they're not agreeing, then we won't poll again unless we have something to come up with. Everybody still the same place?
We have one more. We do have one more vote here now, and as we move forward, I would definitely like to take into consideration his position as we move forward. So, that said, either he will or he won't.
What are you talking about?
Gary had to step out early last time.
He wants,
here for that.
he wants my opinion on going forward, and my opinion is you have 3 votes, so it's, we're going to move forward on it either way, so. But I do have comments on as we go forward, especially when you get to 2B or 2C, 2B and 2C.
Okay.
Some major changes that I would like to see in that, so. And I think staff's in line with some of those changes.
Okay. So clearly we're then moving forward. So under 2, I sort of broke that down into different manageable parts. The consensus was that we were going to allow those who had previously registered and were in good standing and had a temporary state license. Those would be the cultivators that would be able to participate in a new program under regulation in the county. The decision was that parcels of 10 acres or more that are zoned A1, AP, or GF.
Hang on a second, Peter. I think we got issues on 2B or 2A.
2A.
Okay.
So is it all right if we segment this out and
Sure.
proceed as we...
That was the limitation with those who were in good standing and had temporary state licenses.
What's your question?
A majority of the people on our list didn't necessarily have temp licenses in their possession. Some had applied but weren't necessarily presented, but were in good standing. Others were in good standing, but at that time had not submitted. So I think this direct, the way it's written is not necessarily true to the people that were in good standing at the end of the urgency ordinance.
Hey, do not
Please.
start clapping today.
Please.
Happy hands. Go ahead, Ben. Supervisor Mills?
And additionally to that point is, Mr. Mauer could tell you, there was a lot of verified and validated, and there were other pieces to the puzzle. And Sabrina Cable was very clear in that some of them were dragging it out as long as they possibly could with minor technical needs to get addressed. How do we fit those pieces into this puzzle, so to speak? Or are they automatically discounted because they never came into full compliance?
The understanding that I had and what we would recommend, because in some cases we were able to process some cultivation applications more rapidly than others. And in some cases it was just simply, these were the ones that we got to first, others we weren't able to get to. There were 190 state licenses issued in the county. And everyone that was growing under the rules and regulations of the county at that time, and that included those that were, hadn't hadn't issued registration, but they were still in the process. They hadn't been denied yet, was essentially where we're at. So those who were still in process, and because the ordinance allowed people to cultivate while we were processing their application, they would be considered in good standing. It was only if they had been denied or had withdrawn their application, they were not in good standing with the county. So in some regards, it would be unfair to say only those who were issued, because in some cases it was our fault that we didn't get to them. I don't want to use the word fault, but I couldn't think of another word. So it was the county's responsibility to process those applications. For a variety of reasons, we did not get to them all. There may be a handful that we would have ended up denying had we finished our process, but we don't know that. And so they were cultivating legally under the rules of the county at the time, until such time as we actually denied them, and in the cases they went through the appeal process, the final appeal was denied. And they had applied for a state license. Now, all of the state licenses were issued to those who were growing legally in the county until such time as the ban went into effect, and then they were all rescinded. I think with the exception of one that was the indoor cultivator associated with a dispensary, yes. So those would be the ones that would be eligible under a new program, unless you choose to change those requirements.
So you're saying that they've got to have both?
Yes.
The good standing is really then our definition of what good standing would have been?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Toffenauer?
Well, for a purpose of an ordinance, we're going to have to define what good standing is, and in that ordinance.
Yes.
And within that good standing, I'm assuming that the 190 that you mentioned all paid their taxes. As part of good standing, they would have all had to pay the taxes that they owed at the time they were due.
Yes, that's correct.
So that all has to be part of the ordinance as we go forward, not just good standing, because you need a definition for good standing.
Well, at the time that the taxes were due and they didn't pay, we began to deny those for non-payment of taxes. So,
Yeah, but we ended the program, so I just want to make sure that we have all of that verbiage in there in any form in the ordinance defining what good standing is. So there's no question. We can't just use the term good standing.
So I guess that's the point that we would need to be very clear what the board's definition of good standing is.
Correct.
And that might be, this would be the opportunity to do that, I guess.
Just one moment, Mr. Miller. Sheriff?
Yeah, good morning, Board Chair. I just wanted to state that the Sheriff's Office has been keeping track of properties that were doing things illegally. So those properties, we have a list of those, and we'll get them to Mr. Maurer if they haven't already been, that basically will be exempt from being able to receive any type of registration or permit because they were illegal during the process, during the UO. In other words, if they were a registered grower and they were found to be out of compliance, or they were end up denied their application, that piece of property and that name that goes along with that piece of property or any other piece of property will also be denied. So there's some vetting processes already in place that we will pass over to Mr. Maurer.
So, for example, if you were a grower and you were in good standing and you grew after the ban, you know about it?
Correct. Well, the ones that we caught.
This goes in line with the state regulations also, that if any time you're found to be out of compliance or you have been found to be in an illegal process to do with this type of use, you are not allowed to get state licensure also. So I think it
Correct.
precludes, and so I think it goes hand in hand with the state regulations.
It does.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Mr. Maurer, you were going to, how do you want to handle this? Or figuring out what the term for a person in good standing, and just before you get to that, I have a quick question. So to apply for a temporary license, that was in January 18th,
Yes, that's correct.
and we banned on What date?
The ban went into effect in June of 18.
And were people, but we passed the ordinance in January of 18.
Right.
Were people were unable to apply for that temporary license before January 18?
That's correct.
And my question is the "and" part of temporary license, because it does not take a rocket science or a magic 8-ball to figure out that we were going to ban in the month of December. And so it would, who would apply for a temporary state license when you knew you were going down anyway, would be a question I would have. Because, so the "and" part, I'm not so sure that would be a fair, good standing.
Well, that is a policy call of the board.
Yeah.
I think that my recollection was that we required state licensure, and if they didn't get one, that we would then process their application for denial for not complying with state law. That was one of the requirements of the urgency ordinance, was they were in compliance with all applicable state laws. And so, but if you feel that that's sort of immaterial because of the fact that there were cultivators that chose not to renew their application or not to file for the state because they knew the ban was going into effect, that's a policy call that the board would need to make.
Thank you. Supervisor Stopper?
I think that should be something discussed, but when it comes to the definition, after we do the policy call, we should leave that to you and the planning commission to move forward.
We will have to craft that language very carefully so
Later,
that it's
yeah.
clear and succinct, so people know exactly what it is. I don't propose that we do it here, but we just want to make sure what the parameters are
Right.
that you want us to
I concur with Jack to the point is the ban went through in January. A majority of these people were not currently in the process of cultivating because of the season it was. So many were hesitant to move forward on state temporary licenses, and for good reason, because they either knew under one type of regulation that was proposed that they wouldn't be able to move on, or through a ban they wouldn't be able to move on. And some of those people were in compliance with the UO to that point. And they weren't technically functioning when January 1st came around, when the state temporary licenses started to be required.
Supervisor Mills?
Yes, Peter, this in process for denials got me bugged a little bit, because we stopped the entire process when the ban occurred. So those that were in that process towards denial, we just put a timeout right there.
Right.
Where would they fit into this good standing definition? Or is this something we need to have a little bit more broader conversation on?
Well, you may want to have a broader conversation on it. We would consider those in good standing, because at the time they were cultivating legally in the county. We had not denied them. We had not found that they were not in compliance with the urgency ordinance, which would have resulted in a denial. So they had the legal right to cultivate under the terms of the urgency ordinance until we completed the processing of their application. And for one reason or another, in some cases it may have been stalling on their part, in other cases we just didn't get to theirs. They did not get a finished review of their application.
The vote on the ban happened in January.
Yes.
The ban was on the books in June, correct?
It became effective in June because of the variety of factors.
Right, yeah, no, we're all very well aware of all the factors that came into play. Posting and so on. You were processing till June, weren't you?
Yes,
So it didn't end in January?
that's correct. We continue to process up until the date of the ban.
Thank you.
Supervisor Toffenelli?
And the reason for that was to allow them, if they were going to move on, to get a state license. So we were processing whether they were in good standing or we would have rejected them. Is that correct?
Yes.
So they had an opportunity to get a state license.
Right.
Supervisor Callaway, you want to weigh in? No? Okay, so Peter, how do we answer the questions you have?
So right now, it was, what we recommended, what we thought the board had directed before was that it be in good standing with the county and a state license at that time. And I've heard that at least one board member, maybe two, are suggesting that it be one or the other, either a state license or in good standing with the county at that time. I do want to address what the sheriff raised. I'm concerned that unless there is something that documents they went through some kind of due process as far as being found to be cultivating illegally, I would be somewhat reluctant, somewhat concerned about denying someone an application because of an allegation or identification. I understand the concern, and I don't want to necessarily reward those who circumvented the lawful ban in the county. At the same time, I want to make sure that we're on firm legal ground to deny someone because of an identification of potential violation of the code.
Sheriff, what do you have in mind?
Well, the violation of the codes are the fact that we ended up getting a search warrant to eradicate these sites. If we had to get a search warrant to eradicate the site, that means that they were out of compliance. State law, as Mr. Stopper just pointed out, is that if you're out of compliance, you don't get a state license. So
And therefore, that's verification with eradication.
Absolutely.
But if you just had pictures on another site, that wouldn't be one of the ones you presented. So
what
I
we've said-
think you defined it well right there.
Yeah, what we sent to the planning department, I just talked to my lieutenant over there, what we sent to the planning department was sites that have been eradicated through a search warrant. And I'm not sure what co-compliance has done prior to that, but those are what we have done.
Yeah, I think that if the sheriff had to do an eradication or code had to go in, I think that would be
As long as
grounds
we
for
can
not being
document and have a
compliant.
clear standard, and we would have to work with county council to make sure that language is, absolutely clear.
So we need to answer the question about temporary licenses, correct? You need a poll from the board, whether
Yes.
that's in or out. Supervisor Callaway?
It came about that when we first brought this up a couple of months ago, was because to have a control number, because if we went based on just good standing, there would be a larger number than could be managed by county staff. So we said the extra caveat would be a temporary state license.
Right. Yes.
So I agree with Ben that there were people in good standing who did not apply for their state license because there's going to be a ban. Why should they continue to do that and spend money? So why not have a tier system? If we're going to do something, we want it to be successful. We don't want it to cause undue hardship where we're right back into the drama that we've had in the prior years. So if we do a tier system, which I think came up, I'm not sure, that the first go-around would be people who are in good standing, however we define it, and a temporary state license, they can maybe proceed. And then at a certain point in time, whether it's January 2020 or what have you, then we go to those people those cultivators who were in good standing and did not have a temporary license. Because then who's first? I mean, we're going to be going with 300, 400 people. I mean, I don't know how many, but 2 months ago it was 190 something that were in good standing and had a temporary state license.
My recollection was those who had not been denied were in the range of about 300, 350. So there might be.
On top of the one.
Well, I would include the 190.
Inclusive.
Yes, inclusive.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
your Demerita would be let's tier it and let's go like this and we can grow down the road, or
Yes.
if it makes sense?
Yes. I mean, at some point, we have to say, if we say there's 300 and staff's already said we can't manage 300, then we're already setting the program up to fail.
Right.
And not only
May-
for the county, but for those people who make that investment.
May I mention something that has to do with the state law? Is part of the reason we were talking about state temp licensure was to facilitate that those people could actually get a provisional license based on that they were putting an application for an annual. That's going to end at the end of this year in December. So that would facilitate that those people that were in good standing with state temporary licenses could possibly move forward next year. But the people that would put in, that were in, let's just say, good standing without state temporary licenses would have to put in for an annual license later on that would be processed without a provisional and would have to wait much longer. So then there comes in your tier system, because that could take as much as a year or longer, as everyone knows that's dealing with the state right now. So I think right now, I know I did bring it up, but our best way to move forward is to stick with the original 190 and temp licensure. And then if later on we find this to be successful moving forward, then we can start, because of the time constraints and the way things work, we can open it back up next year for amendment to our ordinance if we so choose.
So keeping it the way it is.
That-
More
yeah.
definition in the ordinance.
That's our best control right now, and I do not want to open it up to 350 people and overloading our staff and putting us back in the situation we were, again, with a possible land rush. That's not going to happen on my watch.
Rita, you all right with that?
Yes.
I'm all right with it too. Supervisor Toffenelli?
Yeah, I'm fine with what staff has written here. I would like to add, though, that we're current with their taxes.
I think that would be implied under. Yeah. Supervisor Mills?
And based upon what the sheriff has said, there's a possibility that some of the 190 may not be able to participate anyway.
Very well.
So,
Move on to 2B, Pierre. Do you have clarification you need?
yes.
I have a comment on 2B. I would like to add unclassified. I believe that should be included.
Under 2B1?
2B.
2B1. You want to include it under 2B1, which is the zone parcels? Yeah, sorry. Everybody else? What do you think? Supervisor Stopper?
I agree with Marita. Unclassified was set aside quite some time ago for properties that had certain uses on them, so that they could continue or be grandfathered in. But more so, having worked on the draft general plan update, a lot of these unclassified properties will be going to working lands, which include which is the back zoning, which would include A1, RA, not all of them, but a majority of them. So I think when we consider it needs to be over a certain amount of acreage, but I think it doesn't need an administrative use permit or a conditional use permit. I think that would force them to have to go through a zoning amendment process that's already going to happen if we update our general plan. And that would overload staff with 40 or more unclassified properties of having to go through a zoning amendment at that time, when I don't think it needs to be part of the process. But that's just my position.
Okay, so the position is to include you as part of this non-discretionary permit. Supervisor Toffenelli, do you add?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to disagree with that. You have you listed under 2C, and I think it's listed under 2C because a lot of the U's go up against RRs or there's some of them are surrounded by subdivisions or touch subdivisions. And that's where most of our complaints were, within subdivisions themselves on less than 20 acres or 20 acres. So I'm in favor of keeping it under a conditional use permit, and when we get down there, I'm not in favor of the 20 acres. I'm in favor with staff's report. I'm not even in favor under 2B with the number of acres that are listed here, because even A1, AP, and GF, a lot of it is up against subdivisions. And that's, you go to that small of acreage, that's where a lot of our problems came from. So
If it's all right, I want to try to keep it in small bites. Supervisor Mills, you had a point you wanted to make?
Yes, considering what then Captain Macedo said about the 20 acres and less was the primary problem for law enforcement, is that anything 20 acres or less should not even be part of this discussion, simply to minimize that conflict that was clearly stated. Am I correct?
It is. After doing a little bit of checking, if you go into, I just call them the 20s, Circle 20, Bar 20, Diamond 20, and the M24 Ranch. Those are classified as 20-acre ranches, but if you look at them, they're 20.07, they're 22, they're 24, they're 20.30. Those are our areas. I said this back in 2016, do not put this stuff into the rural residential areas. So if you have to make it 25 acres to keep it out of there, do 25 acres. Keep it out of the rural residential areas, because that was the problem that we were having. It causes the public to call and complain because one of the odors, the traffic, and everything else that goes along with it. We have numerous areas in this county, and if you guys have talked, and we have talked in behind doors about allowing multiple sites or multiple grows on single sites, I'm okay with that, because it's going to let us be able to control things a little bit better. So if somebody has 100 acres and you want to allow them to have 4 sites, 4 growers on that site, I don't have a problem with that. But please do not put it in the rural residential areas again.
So let's.
I just want to say I was strictly talking about unclassified, and I do agree with the sheriff and Mr. Toffanelli when it comes to rural residential. It does not belong in rural residential. That was a major issue that happened within my district, and I had to deal with when I was on the planning commission during 2016. A lot of these rural residential areas even they don't allow other commercial uses, but that's a whole nother conversation. So I concur when it comes to rural residential. I think that it should not be part of this. But when it comes to unclassified or other things, look, you could have 300 acres and it could be bordering a lot of stuff. So, I mean, as long as the setbacks are set in place properly, that should take care of a lot of these issues. But yes, rural residential's out.
If I might, so let's break this into pieces. Who's in favor of unclassified being included in the list under 2B1? So for non-discretionary. Who's in favor of unclassified being in that list?
I am.
Supervisor Mills?
No.
Supervisor Stopper?
Yes.
Supervisor Toffanelli?
no, not without a conditional use permit.
Okay, I agree, yes. So, continues. I think your next question on that was, since this conversation was going, was the minimum parcel size.
Yes.
Is that where I think we were going?
When it comes to unclassified?
No, when it comes to,
Primarily RRs.
yeah, well, you know, we got here on 2BI, we've got minimum parcels of 10, and we've got a staff recommendation of 20. Peter?
So last time, you decided that 10-acre minimum parcel size was appropriate for A1, AP, and general forest, GF, 20-acre minimum parcel size for the residential agriculture. And based on concerns expressed by the sheriff and our experience, we felt that 10 acres was too small. But again, this is a policy call by this board, so it's our recommendation. Turn it back to you for discussion.
Supervisor Mills, do you want to
I
start?
would agree, it's too small. It's too small. It just creates too much rub with neighbors. And too small.
Supervisor Callaway, your lights on?
Well, yeah, I support, for on 2C, I support.
We're still on 2B,
To be.
the minimum parcel
We're just
size
picking up
for
the
the.
parcel
Right,
size
right.
for those.
I'm sticking with staff recommendation.
Staff recommended 20.
Well,
Correct?
this is one that we wanted to bring back for
Non-discretionary.
discussion. Your previous action was 10 for those zones and 20 for RA. We'll also need to establish a minimum parcel size for unclassified. So that's where we're at right now, is what's the appropriate minimum parcel size for a registration or a permit, by right
So,
permit?
Mr. Mauer, when we go through the process of changing the unclassifieds, I'm forgetting the cannabis issue, aren't the unclassifieds, a lot of them going to be A1, AP, and general forest?
There's a range of zone that it depends on the general plan land use designation, and maybe it'd be a good time to clarify, because I know there was some confusion based on some comments I received, that the general plan land use designation, so the umbrella of, it's not zoning, so we'll have working lands or rural residential, other natural resource designations. Beneath those designations are the zones. So it's going to depend on what the land use designation is for that site, as well as surrounding properties, the parcel size. So it could vary. It could be anything from rural residential agriculture to, it wouldn't go into AP because that would be a Williams Net contract, but likely it'd be RA, A1, or perhaps general forest if it's up in the forested area. And there's even a possibility that it could be RR because of, we have 5-acre unclassified zone parcels as well that are probably surrounded by rural residential.
Understanding that, from what I recall, most of them were done per size, so we would have RTA and RTB, which would be the rural residential
Right.
designations, and those were like 0 to 10 acres or somewhere in that vicinity.
5 to 10
10?
is the range for the.
Oh, you're right, but
transition.
RTA was one, and then the RTB was the larger one of
Right.
the two, I believe, if I'm in the right order. And so at a point where those would be done at 20 acres, that's where we should start thinking about our line being 20 acres or larger.
I would say any land that's zoned unclassified, that is proposed to be, and assume it's adopted, a rural transition designation would end up being zoned rural residential. Anything in the working lands designation would either be res ag or A1 agriculture, general agriculture, depending again on the specifics of the site. The natural resources designation would likely be general forest or general agriculture. But again, we have to go through that exercise to determine what's appropriate for those sites.
So staff recommended 20-acre minimum on those A1, AP, GF, and now we've included you into that. So is there any consensus for that minimum parcel size? Supervisor Toffenali?
Yeah, I disagree. I'd rather see it 40 acres. And also a caveat to that, if any of those zones butt up against RR zone, that a conditional use permit process goes through, simply so the surrounding neighbors are notified of it and can submit their comments to it, and possibly the grow site can be located further away from the property lines bounding RR. A lot of these have, like I said earlier in the use, and you made the point that some of them are going to be rural residential. Even 20-acre ones will be RR because they butt up or they're surrounded in that. You're asking for problems. Even the sheriff knows that when he came up and made the comment, at least 25 acres. And with at least with a conditional use permit, if they are abutting an RR, that we can have notification again and can locate the grow site the furthest away from any of the property lines. I think those issues need to be addressed. And again, I'm a proponent for 40 acres minimum on these, just because of the issues that we've had in the past and the chaos that it created.
So the question is, before us is 20 acres and accepting it. Supervisor Mills or Supervisor Stopper, do you guys want to weigh in?
I'm not going to accept anything less than 40 acres being there, but I also agree that the neighboring property owners need to be able to be aware of what's going on, be able to have some mitigation measures, if necessary, put in place, so that we don't disturb their free, full use and enjoyment of their neighboring property. That's one of the things that the UO didn't really consider, is we just dropped these into various places, and the neighbors were left to deal with it as a result. So 40 acres is a good minimum starting point, and I think that when we finally reached the point of a ban, we were talking about 100 acres or more, if you recall, back in January of 2018. So 40 acres is a good starting number. If we start looking at smaller than that, then there's always going to be some kind of conflicts that are going to come in with neighbors, and I would prefer not to get into those conflicts.
Supervisor Stopper, you want 20 acres or where are you at?
I'm not in favor of a conditional use permit on anything that borders rural residential. I had this conversation before. The county, rural residential stands for no rhyme or reason in my mind with the way this county's checkerboarded with it. There isn't probably hardly even a few, even 300-acre properties that doesn't border RR somewhere. So, you know, once we get back to setbacks, if there's an RR on one side, then maybe that setback on the RR side could be exponentially larger to mitigate it. But this would put so many more through such more of a process, adding a whole nother level of bureaucracy. So the conditional use permit is no, but I'm willing to debate the minimum size, but I'm not willing to go to 40 on it. The 20 acre point where there's 20.05s and 23s, that's got some clout to it, because there's plenty of HOAs that had their own rules that got grows inside them. But, you know, I think we need to have a little more discussion on the minimum size.
Marita?
20 acres, and I'll support an AUP.
On what?
You can have a 20-acre grow on rural residential. I thought that's what we were
No,
talking
we're
about.
not there yet.
I don't want to start nickel diming, when you have 23, well, you have 24.5. I mean, 20 acres.
You're talking
Okay, so
2C.
we're talking about item 2B1, minimum acre size on A1, AP, GF, and U zones.
I'm going to leave it at 10 acres.
All right. I am at 20. I'm going to go with the staff recommendation on that. We will get to 2B2 next, but, so we've got Gary and Dennis at 40, Ben's open, and Rita's at 10 acres.
We're talking A1, AP.
We're talking about item 2B1, which is non-discretionary permits for
A1,
So-
AP, GF.
Mr. Chair?
Okay.
I hate
Okay,
to
for
interrupt,
those
but it's
right-
very confusing because you're referring to how things are numbered in the staff memo, and everybody else is seeing that, and it's not the same thing. So when you say
Correct.
2B1, nobody knows where you are. Sorry.
All right.
Okay.
So we're on 2B, which is in the staff report broken into two items. We'll break this into, so under A1, AP, GF, and U, what is the minimum for non-discretionary permit.
With just those four zonings included, I'm good with 20, because none of those are in the HOAs or residential areas.
Okay, so now I've got 240s and 220s.
I'll go,
And a 10.
I'll go 20.
All right. Peter, from the board, it seems like there's a consensus that for those 4 zones, a non-discretionary permit, minimum acreage is 20.
And that would apply to unclassified, so all 5
Includes
zones.
unclassified.
Includes unclassified.
I'm sorry?
So all 5 zones, A1, AP, GF, RA, and,
No, I have
no,
not
all right.
RA.
Okay.
haven't talked to RA yet.
Okay, so, and unclassified,
And
20 acre
unclassified.
minimum.
Now we'll talk about RA,
20 acres.
20 acres. AUP with 20 acres?
No. AUP, non-discretionary,
You want it, you don't want it.
as staff recommended.
Okay, so say, I'm sorry, did you say that again, Maria?
RA, 20 acres, non-discretionary.
Supervisor Mills, your lights on?
40 acres,
Non-discretionary?
non-discretionary.
Supervisor Stopper?
I'm going to reiterate a question I brought up last time discussing this, that actually Dennis answered as to no, but are there any RAs 20 acres inside HOAs and other residential, well, mostly it would be HOAs or townships?
Most of the, what we consider residential subdivision are zoned RR or something smaller like R1. I don't believe, I cannot say categorically, there are no subdivisions that have an RA zoning, but for the most part, I am not aware of any subdivisions that were created with that zoning.
In the
Okay.
current state filed maps in Calaveras County, there are none.
Okay.
And I would concur with them. I did look quite extensively, but there's no way I could get my eyes on every darn property in the county. But, so with that said, 20.
Supervisor Topsala?
40.
Okay, so we have 220s, 240s, I will go with the 20s. All right. Here,
So just the 20 acre minimum for a sort of by right permit process in A1, AP, general forest, unclassified, and residential agriculture. Okay. So then under 2C, we talked about a discretionary permit for other zoning. This was somewhat taken care of in the previous one. We discussed unclassified. The question is there some category of parcel size and zoning that you would want to have some type of discretionary permit? And I think the zoning that is left over is the RR zoning that hasn't really been discussed.
so the first question is, do we want to have
Or, yes.
discretionary permit for RA at less than 20? Because we've already, it's non-discretionary at over 20, so we're talking under 20s.
So I guess the question would be the two-part question. One would be, do you want a discretionary permit for any one of the zones that we just identified on parcels less than 20 acres? And then the second part would be, do you want to allow a discretionary permit process for another zoned parcel? And this would be particularly applied to the RR zone.
So how do you want us to answer that?
So why don't we just first talk about, do we want to have, allow for cultivation with a discretionary permit, a use permit of some sort, in the A1, AP, general forest, U, or res ag zone?
Do we want to have
Less than
any
20
farms
acres.
of less than 20 acres? Supervisor Callaway, your lights on?
Yeah, I would like it, but there's not the votes for it. So if the question is, do we want a discretionary permit on A1, AP, GF, is that what I heard you say, Mr. Mauer?
So last time we had talked about, you had set by right limit at 10 acres and then 20 acres for RA. and we talked about the potential for a use permit process for RR and for parcels of between 10 and 20 acres on the RA zone. And so now that we've bumped up the minimum parcel size for all of those zones, do you want to allow for some type of discretionary permit for smaller parcels with those zones? Or do you want to allow for a permit process in the RR zone?
For me, because one rule doesn't necessarily fit every single situation, I would support an AUP for those under 20 acres for the RA, the unclassified A1, AP, GF.
Supervisor Mills?
Nothing under 20, discretionary permit. Subdivisions have to be taken off the table.
Supervisor Toffenali?
I would not support anything in this category 2C.
No
Nothing.
discretionary?
Nothing.
I mean, no,
No sizes, none of this at all. RR, U, R, 20, under 10 to 20 acres.
Supervisor Stopper?
The two supervisors on my right and left both have very good points. I mean, this is a lot of the stuff that we've dealt with since 2016 that has caused us and put us through the strife, and I understand that. Just because someone applies for an administrative use permit or a conditional use permit does not mean they're going to be able to move forward. And it's a very costly process. If you're going to go through that costly process, you can afford a piece of property that's larger to move forward.
Would you support taking 2C off the table?
I'm thinking Dennis.
Thank you.
Many other uses that we do allow for an administrative use permit or a conditional use permit because, look, Marita's right also, one size does not fit all. So for some reason, there's a 10-acre plot surrounded by 100-acre plots out in the middle of Mountain Ranch. Someone could apply for a conditional use permit, doesn't mean they're going to go through it. So I could support that.
You're supporting,
An administrative use permit, but, you know, I'm really hesitant to even bring RR into the conversation.
so you're looking at, so Marita's, make sure I get this right, Marita. You're saying there could be an administrative use permit or a conditional use permit on those categories that we just outlined, the A1, the AP, the GF, RA, and U, at less than 20 acres if they go through the permit.
Correct.
Where are you at, Ben?
How do we flip to this?
We haven't talked about RR yet, or let's circle back on it.
Okay, yeah, no, it's part of C, just a little bit lower,
Yeah.
I apologize. I could support that, doesn't mean it's gonna happen, so, yeah.
I would only support that under a conditional use permit. I think we have to make the bar very
That's-
high. If anybody pops off in this, I'm gonna hold this line really close today. So everybody's on warning. I will warn you, and then I'll ask you to leave. This is a very charged subject. We're working hard on everybody's behalf, and we'd appreciate it if you'd be respectful while we do that. Thank you.
You know, Chair, I appreciate you talking about setting the bar high. The conditional use permit will provide neighbors that opportunity to weigh in. It's just got to be there. So that's why I talked about discretionary. But we get to the RRs, the 2C RRs, that's a different world for me, especially when it comes to the number of subdivisions. And those subdivisions and homeowners associations, they can build their own discretionary decisions on land use as well. They're not bound strictly by what the county's limitations are. So we have to always keep that in mind as well.
I agree. So let's go back. We're talking about conditional or AUP. I think there's 3 votes. I've taken on that question, but we don't have a consistent message on if it's a CUP or AUP. I'm suggesting a CUP.
It would have to be a CUP in my mind, because the weighing in of the neighbors is crucial, and this is why we would put it forward as such, because the weighing in of the neighbors is part of mitigating the issue.
Mr. Mauer, under an AUP, do you notify the neighbors, talk to the neighbors?
We do provide notice. My hesitation for doing it under AUP is that I have the approving authority, or the planning director has the approving authority on that. I'm reluctant to take on that responsibility, and I think that it's something that is appropriate for the planning commission to do.
Okay, I'll fold.
So, make sure I've got this right. So we're saying that on those elements we said A1, AP, General Forestry, RA, and U, we will allow between, on sites that are 10 acres or greater, an opportunity to go apply for a CUP. Is that correct? I got that right?
Yeah, not to be below 10 acres.
Okay, you got that?
Yes.
All right.
Okay.
All right.
So next item, 2D, or for those who don't qualify, they have the right.
Peter, we got to take on the
Oh, I'm sorry, RR. Just keep trying to move forward. So RR zone. And I think that's where really the rub seems to be with that zoning. Do we want to allow it at all within that zone, or do you want to have some opportunity for someone to apply for a permit?
I support RR conditional use permit. I understand RR is controversial. I think most of the concerns came up when you were in a more urban type subdivision versus a 20-acre subdivision, where you had 2.5 acres and 5 acres and 6 acres or 10 acres. But 20 acres is a lot of property, and under a conditional use permit. And we have 20 acres in, as Ben mentioned earlier, in the middle of an A1 or general forest area. And so now we're saying you can't do it. I just think with a conditional use permit, the concerns can be taken into consideration, because we have RRs that are in subdivisions, RRs that are not in subdivisions. Cut to the chase, RR conditional use permit, and let the chips fall where they may when we go through the CUP process.
Peter, if I can ask, there's no restriction on, if you've got an 80-acre RR, rezoning it if you go through the regular process, correct?
Yes, it would be the right for someone to apply for a zoning amendment. Again, it's discretionary. It's a legislative act. Your board gets that final say. If it's appropriate for rezone to, say, A1, then that would be, and we've processed several of those
Just like
in the
we do
past.
for any other property.
Yes.
Part of the process, if we did put forward a conditional use permit, may require them to rezone it?
No, that was under the unclassified zoning.
No.
Our
Okay.
code requires that if we issue a discretionary permit, because it is an interim zone,
Right.
that they rezone the property from a
Okay.
So, our,
And let me.
I can't-
Supervisor Keller, I'm sorry, I cut you
Go
off.
ahead, Dennis.
Guys want
You
to arm
go.
wrestle?
By the definition of rural residential, and you know how many times we've gone over this, of this is residential use first, all other use is secondary. We flipped that and push it into an option. I can't support rural residential here. If they want to go to a rezone or they want to find another way to, for land use, great, but not in rural residential zones, just by definition.
Supervisor Stopper? Oh, excuse me, Supervisor Callaway. You had something you wanted to add?
You mentioned about, you had a large RR parcel, you could request a rezone. We're now asking people to spend more money. I mean, are we going to be, we talk about being a business-friendly county. Well, we're doing everything we can to make this a non-business friendly scenario. And I think, we set up the base. If they choose to do it, they do. Anybody can rezone. Anybody can ask for a rezoning. I mean, you can have 2 acres and ask for it to be an M1 zone, and then you're in the middle of Meadowmont. Doesn't mean you're going to get it. So I'm trying to balance the need of those people who've made investments, who go back to item 2A, prior registration in good standing with a temporary state license, and they're on RR. They've done everything, they've played by the rules, and now we're saying, oh no, because you're in the middle of Circle 20 or Bar 20 or someplace in Mountain Ranch. I think that's disingenuous on our part.
Supervisor Stopper, you wanted to say something?
We already said no when we put forward a ban. And I know there's a lot of people in this room that aren't going to like it, but you have an option, a zoning amendment. If I wanted to start a farm, I would not go out looking for rural residential property. I would buy rural residential property, which I have, to put my house on. No rural residential, you can go through a zoning amendment.
Okay, so I've got 1 yes for rural residential, 1 no. Supervisor Toffenelli? Supervisor Mills?
No
Sorry.
rural residential.
Supervisor, 2 no rural residential. Supervisor
I've
Toffenelli?
never supported RR. I would never vote for RR. I've been very consistent since the beginning on RR. It's created nothing but problems. I don't live in a gated community. I live out in RR in the country, so it's going to affect a lot of people, I already know. So,
No RR. Next question.
So this one is just sort of a confirmation that people do have the right to apply for a zoning amendment if their zoning does not. They have that right anyway, but it's just sort of a confirmation of that. So unless there's any further discussion on that issue, the next item was 3, the timing of cultivation. And we just wanted to make it clear, and I believe that the board confirmed that they needed to get whatever permits they needed from the county, and they needed to get a state license before cultivation can begin. We're not going to go back to the urgency ordinance where you can grow until you're determined not be legal. We want to make sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed prior to cultivation. So that was the direction that I thought we'd heard. I know there's some other issues along those lines, so I'll turn it back to the board for discussion.
Is there any consent around this? Everybody has to wait till they,
No consent on my part at the moment. Again, I go back, we want an ordinance. We are also saying you had to have prior registration and a temporary state permit. So, and we're trying to do this so people can get their provisional or whatever the word is, it begins with. But why not have some kind of conditional approval where they could at least start their, I know I'm learning more than I want to, their mothers or their clones on submittal, after they submit the application, they start the process. And if pending the local permit again that they're going through. Then if they don't get it, then the plants have to be destroyed. But we're waiting for this long process to take place. And I just thought maybe if there was some support for conditional approval. I understand what Mr. Mauer says. I understand the concerns that the board had gone through in the past, but either we're on this train or we're not.
Supervisor Mills?
Mr. Mauer, is there any other business that you can start up in Calaveras County this way? Take your time. I would like to see all the ducks in a row
Yeah.
and all the approvals met, all the requirements met before anything goes to work. Before you light the bonfire, let's be sure we've got the perimeter set, and everybody's agreeing to it. To be able to do, as Supervisor Callaway suggests, is to push us back into a potential urgency ordinance condition, and I'm not in favor of it.
I'll assume that was a rhetorical question.
It's a rhetorical question, but thank you for letting me do that.
Supervisor Stauber?
With the timeline as it may be, if anything comes forward this winter. Number 3, when applying to the state for a permit, applicant shall be provided by the county a conditional local authorization letter to facilitate the state licensure process. The reason I would ask for this is because if we're processing 190 at largest case scenario, that takes the county some time. So a local authorization letter to the state so that they may move forward with the state process, at which time, look, the state qualifications on registration and everything are far more, there are larger hurdles to cross now than even with the urgency ordinance in the past. So this helps facilitate the process of getting the state licensure and our local authority over it at the same time. And that way the process runs more smooth.
So are you suggesting that to be like a concurrent licensing process between the state and the county so that they apply to us, they have the right then to apply to the state? I'd like to defer to council on that. My understanding is they actually have to have a local permit before they can apply, or in order to apply.
There's the way I understand it with the past licensure, if you were in good standing in the past, you may apply to the state, and that's where the non-annual but the provisional license comes into it. So there are multiple things in there, but I know that talking to other counties, that there has been the state working with the counties on moving forward, and there's other things I'm going to bring up later where the state's actually helping pay for some of the compliance checks and everything on some of the properties so that it doesn't cost the county. But that's a whole nother part. I'm sticking with number 3 right now, and it's something to consider and possibly reach out to the state and see. But to get a provisional license, all you had to do was be in good standing and have the county authority to move forward.
Supervisor Mills, your light's on?
Yeah, just continuing the conversation is that we want to be sure that we're incentivizing those that do come forward and get into this process, that we don't backtrack over what we did under the urgency ordinance of dragging things out and not having staff capable of processing in a timely manner and all of the things that we did. I think we learned some valuable lessons from that. So the only way to do that is how do we incentivize our staff as well as the person who's applying to get this done in as timely a manner as possible so that they can get their boots on the ground and go to work if that's what they're wanting to do. And to drag it out 6 months or a year is not productive to anybody on either side.
Right.
So I just want to ensure that we have all the ducks in a row before we're saying, put the plants in the ground, to ensure that we're not going to go through that process again.
And that's why I'm making my suggestion about it to move forward with the state, because, you know, to get your plants in the ground, there are so many requirements when it comes to just what soil you use and everything else. And Dennis is right. If we're going to move forward with this, we need to incentivize everyone to obey the law. And you know, there is a certain point, you know, where else can I can't put in a liquor store without being fully permitted and licensed before, you know, and start selling liquor.
So let me call the question. Who's in favor of keeping it that you have to get all your permits and licenses in line before cultivation? Gary?
Yes, I'm in favor of that.
And-
And by the way, most of them aren't in the ground. They put them in pots above the ground. Sorry.
Supervisor Stopper?
If the ground's 3 feet above, it's still ground.
Killing me, guys.
Anyways, I'm in favor of having the permit process before, but I also would like to, we work forward on this ordinance, please look into the authorization letter, and then, you know, let the planning commission know about it, and if there is a possibility, then maybe it can be part of the process. in the
I'd like to have Julie weigh in, because she's done some research on this.
I just want to, I think it'd be easier to just explain the process to the board, and if we can get directions so that we know what to write, it would be easier for staff. The state requires, prior to licensure, some sort of letter or authorization that states that they're in compliance with the local permitting scheme, or whatever local scheme there is. And so the policy question before the board would be, do you want to sign off that people are in compliance before they have applied for and received the permit that you have stated you would like to see before cultivation takes place? That's the question before you.
Yes.
Got 2 for yes. Supervisor Mills?
Yes.
Yes. Supervisor Callaway, I believe you are no. Yes, so everything's got to be locked up before we go forward.
Okay.
We got time for one more before I'm breaking.
Okay,
this
so number 4 was just whether you want or not to establish any kind of cap. And I think the
Papana?
prior direction was that we were going to limit it by the numbers of prior registered growers in good standing and by the zoning restrictions, rather than to have an arbitrary number of some sort that says, okay, we're only going to allow 50 or 100 or whatever that number is. Any changes to that?
Supervisor Toffenali?
I'm good with it.
Supervisor Stopper? Question is, go with the zoning rather than a number.
Right.
Supervisor Stopper?
This is one I have a hard time with, because the amount of permits per person is different than the total amount of applicants. So they don't necessarily fall hand in hand. I would say with the state being, we shouldn't box ourselves in and overly specific and limit to prior viable applicants, but we'll limit the prior viable applicants, but do not cap the number of permits. This way, if someone were to have 200 acres and be able to have multiple permits on it, then that could be an option under one LLC. Well, it's kind of, they kind of go hand in hand, that's why I wrote them together.
Let's do 4 first, we'll just check that off.
I think they go.
So the question stands, want a numerical cap or just use the zoning as we're moving forward?
Use the zoning.
Okay.
Zoning.
Zoning?
Zoning.
All right, there you go. We will return at 1:30 and we will start on number 5. Apologize, we're a little late behind everything, but thank you for your patience.